Good morning, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to our Decision 2022 Maryland 6th Congressional District Forum at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm Paul Fry, President of the Chamber. We're so glad you're able to join us this morning. Thank you for being here. We are doing this. Our host sponsor we'll hear from shortly is Jamison Door Company. Our supporting sponsor is Penmar Realtors, and this is in partnership with the League of Women Voters of Washington County. Our moderator this morning, whom you'll meet shortly, is Richard Wilson. He serves on our Government Affairs Committee here at the Chamber, and so we'll look forward to hearing from Richard and from our candidates this morning. We'd like to welcome our mayor, City of Hagerstown. Mayor Emily Keller's here this morning. I saw her. Where did she end up sitting? Good morning, Mayor. A lot going on in town. Thanks for being here. And we'll meet our candidates for the 6th Congressional District here in Maryland, Congressman Trone and Maryland Delegate Neil Parrott shortly. We have a number of board members in attendance. We have Dwight Clark, Dr. Jim Klauber, and Tim Troxel. Good morning, gentlemen. Sorry you're here this morning. Let's give them a round of applause and welcome them. And speaking of Dr. Klauber, he is our Business Person of the Year for our Business Awards. Congratulations. We'd also like to thank our friends from Antietam Broadband. As you know, they'll be recording this morning, so thank you for doing that. And also like to thank the folks at the Chamber helping to organize all these things. Got here even earlier than you did. I started yesterday and got here this morning. Donna, Brianne, and Maddie, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, ladies, for the work you're doing. We'd also like to thank our folks here at Applause Caterers for a great breakfast. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, ladies. Good as usual. And I just have a couple shameless plugs for some Chamber events coming up you may be interested in. We have a learning lunch next Tuesday, November 1st at the Chamber from 11:30 to 1. The topic, it's not too easy to think about that. 10 mistakes business owners make that can cost thousands in taxes. Bev Stitley, President of Saunders Tax and Accounting, will be presenting. Our next forum will be next Wednesday. That's our last one of the series, Board of Education. Again, here at Applause Caterers, starting at 7 o'clock for breakfast. And our 20th Annual Economic Summit, November 10th, Fountainhead Country Club. We're going to be joined by Anirban Basu, CEO of Sage Policy Group. He'll be talking about our state of economy at the international level all the way down here to Hagerstown. We're looking forward to that. And lastly, November 18th, this is open to everybody. Managing 4 Generations in the Workplace. It's with Glenn Shepard. It's going to be a virtual masterclass from 10 to 10:45, again Friday, November 18th. Glenn was here a couple weeks ago. He was sold out, and this particular area was very popular, working with the 4 or 5 different generations in the workplace. So we'll give you information. All this is at hagerstown.org. It's now my pleasure to bring up Mr. John Williams. He is chair of Jamison Door Company and this morning's sponsor. Let's welcome John.
Well, we host all of these candidate forums because we think it's just really important for everybody to hear the candidates and have them express their views, and then we make our choices. But so it's an honor for us to be part of this, and we're particularly grateful to the candidates who show up for these and participate in these. So you didn't come here to hear me, so let's get on with it.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your company's continued support of these events. Just a couple of things I want to say before I bring up Richard Wilson. First of all, the Chamber does not endorse candidates. We think it's important for the voters to get to know the candidates, get to know the issues, so that's our role. We work with our Government Affairs Committee and our membership to craft questions that we think are of importance here in Washington County related to business and other topics you will hear about. And so with that said, you all got this statement, but I want to read it. I think it's important. We do thank you for attending today's forum. We look forward to a robust discussion of the issues. And with that said, the event is being video and audio recorded by Antietam Broadband for future airing. And again, we'll provide a link after today if you want to see it as well. And you're talking to Chamber of Commerce, so competition is good. And with that said, out of respect for the process and both candidates, we ask that all attendees refrain from clapping, cheering, commenting, or yelling from the audience. And most of you don't know me. I'm a nice guy. However, any attendees that cause this disruption, we're going to ask you to leave. So we want this to be a good process. We want you to hear the candidates. we're already divisive enough as a country. I think we can take about an hour and a half here this morning and listen to the candidates and hear their perspectives respectfully. So thank you in advance for your cooperation. With that said, please help me welcome this morning's moderator, Mr. Richard Wilson.
In keeping with the tone that Paul has set for us this morning, I want to go into a little bit of deep league theological talk about what the difference is between a debate and a forum. In a debate, you would have exchanges between candidates. We are trying to discourage that. And this opportunity is being used to air out some issues so that the electorate will be better informed. So hence the choice of forum as the definition of what we're attempting to provide for you this morning. To be fair, we have arranged the questions and the amount of time allotted for your responses to each of you the same amount of time, and the privilege of being asked the question first the same number of times. I'll be reading the question for you and then telling you the time allotted, and then I will indicate which candidate goes first on the particular question. You may use the unexpired portion of time to go back and cover something that was left out previously. We have a yellow card that Ms. Long is showing you that will be displayed when there's 15 minutes left in your allotted time. And then the red flag, 15 minutes, I say? 15 seconds would be the accurate, thank you, the audience. And then the red card is where you should finish the thought that you're in the middle of, but don't, if you put a period in, I'm going to call you on it. Okay. What we'd like to begin with this morning is giving each candidate an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so for 2 minutes, our first question is for you to focus on how you would see your role representing Washington County in the 6th District. And this will be 2 minutes, as I indicated. If elected in November, you will become our representative in Congress. We would like to start by giving you that 2 minutes for your self-introduction. And we'll call on Mr. Parrott first.
Well, good morning. Thank each one of you for being here today. I really appreciate it. This is an important election. It's a very close election. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this event. I want to thank Paul Fry in particular. I want to thank Antietam Cable for broadcasting the event so people can watch this later on. I want to thank our moderator, Richard. Like I said, this election, there are consequences. If you think back over the last 2 years, there's one question I want you to ask yourself is, are you better off now or were you better off then? Inflation's at a basically a 30-year high right now. Stock market has gone down 25%. And I could go on and on and on about how the economy is simply not doing well. And that's really as a result of the Biden, Pelosi, Trone agenda, that they've increased spending. They're spending things that we don't have, we can't afford. We're borrowing this money from China. We're just printing it. It's not the way to help our economy be successful. As a matter of fact, it's devaluing the dollar, which is contributing to the sky market very high inflation. I only have 2 minutes, but I do want to tell you, my wife and I decided to come to Hagerstown. When we first got married, we were married in '99. We went to Middletown, where we lived for about 3 years, and we looked around for a house. We went to Hagerstown because this area, we were told, was a great place to raise kids. And I can tell you, it is a great place to raise kids. My wife and I, we started the Hagerstown Area Summer Swimming Program. Over 200 kids served each summer. It's been a great place. My son right now is in Boonesboro High School. My 2 girls are in college. But this is a wonderful community. And when you send me to D.C., you will know that I'm here. I'm one of you. You can talk to me. I'm approachable. And I'm going to make sure that we are represented and we get what we need to really help our community in D.C., to help our families. And the very first thing we're going to do is try to work on not spending so much money.
Thank
there
you,
we go. There's the red.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us here today. Richard, Paul, Neil, thanks for being here. Everybody, thanks for coming out this early this morning, and I know you came for the bacon, and that's okay. I want to get some bacon on my way out for sure. I think when you look at a candidate in an office, what you're looking for is who that individual really is, and who they are is where they've come from, and the sum of their totals of their accomplishments, and why they want to be in Congress. Why do you want to do this job? Heaven forbid. So I think what I would like to start with quickly is I was born in Greenbelt, Cheverly, Maryland. My mom taught public school in Greenbelt, Maryland, but I grew up on a 200-acre farm. Most of you know that. Chicken, hogs, and we learned to work. And you learn to work at $1.80 an hour. You learn to punch a time clock, and you learn what 70, 80, 90, 100 hours was a week. And that sets a foundation of who you are and sets a foundation of your values and how you go about building a business. You also experience failure. The failure of our farm, the alcoholism of my father, and the bankruptcy that followed, and taking the farm and starting at zero over again. Those are good things. They build resiliency. They build a toughness. And they build an understanding that it's not easy for everybody every day. A lot of folks, we struggle. And we struggled then, absolutely. But from there, we went and picked it up. I started an egg brokerage business. That was very successful for 2 years. Basically a telephone guy, brokering eggs. 2 years later, the chickens died of the avian flu. Millions of chickens died in central Pennsylvania and the East Coast. And you started back at zero again. Luckily, I had started a small package store when I was at the Wharton School of Business. That grew into Total Wine and More. Now the company is in 27 states. I have 12,000 employees. And we're the largest wine and spirit retailer in the United States, with over $5 billion in sales. That's the background.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. You get the next question, so you have an additional 90 seconds to talk about what you see as your immediate legislative priorities. Mr. Trone.
So with that background, you ask, why would you come to Congress? And that's the immediate legislative priorities. Our philanthropy was focused on education, on addiction, on mental health, on medical research. Those are things that we made huge strides with millions and millions and tens of millions, really, of dollars to help in those areas, but it wasn't enough. That's why I ran for Congress. I ran for Congress to move the dime, move the national folks across the whole country to focus on those key points: addiction, mental health, and medical research. Those are things that are long-term, things about the next generation, about my kids, your grandchildren. And that's how government should work. It should work long-term. Unfortunately, it's very broken. It's very short-term focused. That's absolutely wrong. And of course, government is not bipartisan. We've got to be bipartisan, and you take that from your business background. There's a lot that government can learn from business. There's very little business can learn from government. That is unquestionably true. But that bipartisanship, I was ranked the most bipartisan member in Maryland, #1. Ranked the 12th most bipartisan member in the entire Congress and the Senate. That's 12 out of 535. That's how I work. I work across the aisle, I work together with Republicans, and it shows in those kind of scores.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott.
Our country needs to change the direction that we're headed right now. That's one big reason I'm running for U.S. Congress. The Republicans have come out with the commitment to America. I completely support that commitment. We need to change how our economy is operated. We can't spend money that we don't have. We can't continue to borrow from China. We can't continue to just print money and make inflation get worse. Crime in many places is at an all-time high. We need to support our police. My opponent voted to defund the police. Our border is out of control. It's interesting, if you look at the stats, on Friday at midnight, the Biden administration released the stats. 227,547 migrant encounters, more than ever has happened at the border. Just consider, the population of Washington County is 154,000 people. More than the whole county of Washington County came across the border and was caught in September. That's unacceptable. We have to close the border. You know, which gets to drugs. Opioids, fentanyl, and we're seeing it. Things that look like sweet tarts that might get into Halloween candy this year are coming right across that border. And yet my opponent will do nothing to close the border, neither will the Biden administration. These things have to change. They have to change quickly. They have to change now. Parents have to be involved in their children's education. And we need to have a government that's fair. That's why I supported getting rid of gerrymandering, and yet my opponent wrote an amicus brief to keep the gerrymandered districts. I think he wants to take us in the wrong direction. The contrast is stark. Thank you.
Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone, what will you do to, well, no, I'm going with Mr. Parrott. Second question, what will you do to build trust in government? And can you identify one opportunity for cooperation across party lines? So, Mr. Parrott.
You know, when I took the gerrymandered districts to referendum, I worked with Democrats, Republicans, actually a lot of Democrats in Montgomery County, because we all saw that it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that they divided Frederick County in two. It wasn't fair that they came in and divided our communities just so Roscoe Bartlett would lose an election. And yet we worked together, worked with Common Cause, groups that I wouldn't normally work with, but we had a common cause. We worked together. We changed the district. I sued. We won. It was called an extreme partisan gerrymander. He supported that map. I completely opposed the map. We need to work together. Now, as far as being bipartisan, my opponent claims to be bipartisan, but when you look at his voting record, it's 100% with Nancy Pelosi. That, in no way, is a bipartisan voting record. If you look at my record, you'll see that I've worked with different people across the aisle. Depending on the issue, you can work together and you can get things done. And I've been able to do that. Ronald Reagan says that a lot can get done if it doesn't matter who takes the credit for what gets done. And I've been able to do that with many different bills, with many different initiatives in Annapolis. I'm very thankful for a 12-year record there where I've worked oftentimes across the aisle. One of the people I'm going to tell you about is Aruna Miller. She and I both saw, and she's your lieutenant governor candidate for governor. She and I worked for the ICC. We both saw that speed limit when it was opened at 55 miles an hour, people were getting tickets. It was unfair. We both got together. We're both transportation engineers. That speed limit is now 60 because of the work that Aruna Miller and I did. And I'm very thankful to be able to work with her on that important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone.
The bipartisan numbers, they speak for themselves. They're done by an independent national commission. 12 out of 535. That's the top of the bipartisan list. So that's just what the facts are. Facts what we always should follow. Let's talk about defunding the police. I've certainly never, ever voted to defund the police. Matter of fact, I just got the endorsement of the largest police organization in this state, Fraternal Order of Police, number 35. So they've endorsed us, and there's only one person really on the stage that's voted to defund the police. Our governor, Larry Hogan, the guy that's very popular here, good governor, he's been very good. He had a bill called Refund the Police, $45.9 million. One guy on the stage voted to defund that and not approve that. And I think it's a guy I'm looking at. So 45.9, Larry Hogan's bill, Neil voted against it. Matter of fact, Larry Hogan, the Republican governor, there's only one candidate in this state that's a Republican that he did not endorse. He's here too.
That's not true.
Not endorsed by Larry Hogan. That's the truth. Pick up the phone. Don't make up any more stuff today. You're off to a bad start already. So let's just stay with the truth. If we follow truth, we follow facts, we follow science, life is so much better. We don't have alternate facts. They don't exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. I would like to ask both candidates to pay attention to the question. I'd be glad to read it again, but I would appreciate if you would focus on the substantive issues that are raised in the question. Stay away from the record of your opponent. Stand on your own ground, if you will. So the next question goes to you first, Mr. Trone, and it's for 1 minute. To conclude this section of our forum, we'd like to ask each of you whether you support term limits for members of Congress and have you share your rationale for your position with us. And here's your 1 minute begins now, Mr. Trone.
Yeah, I think term limits are an excellent idea. I'm on the record 100 times supporting term limits. People should come into public service. They should serve. Then they should get the heck out of public service. They should not be permanent public servants. And what we have in Washington is too many state delegates serve 10, 12 years. Then they become a state senator, serve 10, 12 years. then they become a U.S. congressman, and then they try to be a U.S. senator. And their whole life is not making a payroll. Their whole life is not running a business and understanding how the whole world actually works. Their whole life is just getting that check from Annapolis, getting that check from Washington. Term limits are a fantastic idea. I don't think they'll pass, but boy, you got my vote literally every time. It's a really good idea. Serve and go home. I can't wait to be done serving and go home.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
It's interesting. It says that he's paying $12 million to try and get back in there.
Mr. Parrott, that was a comment directed to, not to the audience. Thank you.
The question about police that came up, George Floyd is the bill that he voted for to defund the police, the George Floyd bill. I never voted to defund the police. What he's talking about is the general fund. I mean, just because I voted against the general fund budget doesn't mean I voted against police. That's just silly. You know, it's kind of deceitful what I'm hearing from my
Mr.
opponent.
Parrott, the question is regarding term limits.
And I'll get to there. I've signed the U.S. term limits pledge. My opponent has not. I support term limits, and he won't go on the record as actually signing that pledge to support them. You're welcome to, though. Term limits are important to make sure we have citizen legislators. Now, I'm going to tell you this, though. I'm not going to make the commitment to term limit myself, but I will be pushing very, very hard to push term limits across the board because I think that's necessary. We have, one last comment. He also talked about Hogan endorsing every single candidate. That is simply not true. Only 3 out of 8 people.
Thank you for the clarification. Our next series of questions will focus on Congress and our economy, and we'll be giving you 90 seconds for your responses. And first, we turn to Mr. Parrott, and we are asking, economics is a tough subject, whether we're trying to understand what is going on locally or at the national level, much less on the global stage. Our citizens and our business owners wonder if the current economy is going to fix itself, or if we're patient, or whether there is a role for the federal government to intervene and what that proper federal role might be. So, Mr. Parrott, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds for that.
So I'd just like to ask you, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago? Almost every American will say, no, we're not. Our stock markets are taking a hit. The economy, inflation is going crazy. It costs a whole lot more to buy groceries than it did just 2 years ago. About 15% more. It's about 10% each year. Inflation's at 8.5%. We have to change the direction our country's going in. We can't afford another 2 years of the Biden, Pelosi, Trone agenda, and that's where having Congress taken over by the Republicans is going to change the direction our country's going in. We have to have this change. We have to make sure that we get responsible government in D.C., and unfortunately what we've seen is irresponsibility from D.C. $500 billion there, $500 billion there, $4 trillion here. It kind of adds up. And it adds up by devaluing our dollar. It adds up by making it more expensive. And it adds up by hurting middle America. And you know who it hurts a lot, I really feel badly for? Our seniors. A lot of them are on fixed incomes. They're going to go into this winter, and it's going to cost right now for natural gas, for propane, for fuel oil, it costs 3 times what it cost just last year to fill that up. Some seniors this winter are going to have to choose between whether they're going to eat or whether they're going to heat their homes. Those decisions should not have to be made, and yet it's this administration that's brought us to the brink of really a huge recession. I think it's very disappointing, and we need to change now.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone, please focus on what the nature of an economy is and whether we need to wait it out and what the appropriate role is of the federal government.
There's no question we are absolutely better off today than we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago was October 2020, the height of the pandemic. 1 million people dead, business shut down all over the country. We are way better off than we were then. Thank God we had the American Rescue Plan. Thank God we had the vaccine. Thank God we've had therapeutics to help us when we got COVID, because 1 million of us are dead. And that's a bad thing. So are we better? Absolutely. Are we where we want to be? Definitely not. Inflation is ravaging the country. But you got to break the inflation apart and understand it. It's 8% right now. 5% is the actual inflation number when you don't cut out oil, gas, and Ukraine, which is farming and fertilizer. Those things are way off the chart, and that's pulling the average numbers up to 8%. So it's terrible right now, the price of gas, the price of food, the price our farmers are paying, too high. They're hurting. So we've got to do a lot about it. The American Inflation Act cuts $370 billion out of our budget. But the fact is, wars and pandemics are trillions of dollars of money, and that feeds inflation. That spending feeds the inflation. So the Inflation Reduction Act helps us on therapeutics, but doesn't fix it short term. We're going to have to jump back to that on what we do on a short-term basis, because I'm getting the red card.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Again, for 1 minute and 30 seconds, the next question is, as the district continues to grow, there is a need for additional significant public infrastructure maintenance investment. How do you intend to increase federal spending on infrastructure in the western portion of the district? And that goes first to Mr. Trone.
Yeah, to finish up on long-term, 50 therapeutics are going to get negotiated. So there's going to be a cap on Medicare spending at $2,000, and there's going to be insulin capped at $35. All those are going to save a lot of money in inflation, but they don't hit the 24, 25. So short term, we've passed legislation in the House, can't get it through the Senate to cut back on corporate oil company profits. Chevron, 4 quarters ago, they made $3.1 billion. The quarter this year, they made $12 billion. I think it's just a little bit of price gouging, but we cannot get any Republican votes, 0, in the Senate to pass these type of bills. Now, to jump back on infrastructure, I voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We brought with that the Appalachian Regional Highway Bill. I'm the sponsor in the House. I'm the guy. Joe Manchin in the Senate, $1.25 billion Appalachian Highway System. With that, we fixed $77 million to fix 219. We got $10 million to fix 220. We got $80 million is going to be announced very shortly in Annapolis. It's all federal money to Annapolis. $80 million, finish phase 2 of I-81. Then we're going to finish up the planning on phase 3 and 4. 2 is going to be done. We've also got $34 million from the infrastructure again to fix Cumberland and the paving, and $150 million to fix Route 15. $350 million I brought back. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and I sit on the subcommittee for transportation. I get it.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott. And again, the focus of this question is on investment in infrastructure.
So one thing with our infrastructure that we need to be able to have is we had a lot of drilling leases for gas and oil. A lot of those are canceled. Actually, the very first day of President Biden's administration, the Keystone XL pipeline canceled first day, the Biden administration. And then at the same time, he allowed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to go between Germany and Europe. You know, if we want to bring the cost of oil down, we need to have long-term leases. We need to have the Keystone XL pipeline. And it's these policies, actually, the Green New Deal type policies that are trying to remove oil, that's making the costs go up. It's not the oil companies. It's the policies, the Biden, Pelosi, Trone agenda that are making the cost of fuel go up. Now, when you look at infrastructure needs, I'm really glad to see that President Biden was here. He wouldn't be here if this wasn't a close election, if we hadn't won the gerrymandered map and gotten real voices back into Washington County and in this area. So thankfully he was here, and thankfully it almost seems like an election ploy, because it seems like a couple of weeks before the election he's going to announce funding for I-81, and I'm really thankful for that funding. But I'm not sure that we would have had that funding if this wasn't a really close race. I-270, I've never heard my opponent talk one time about whether he wants the project or doesn't want the project that Governor Hogan's put forward. I really have no idea what your position is, but I completely support it. We have to have I-270 widened. It is a part of that project. As a state delegate, I made sure that I-70 Phase 4 was included in the I-270 project, which is huge. You all see it every afternoon if you're driving from the Baltimore area back to Washington County. A huge, huge backup. We have to build I-70 Phase 4.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. The next question, we ask you how you intend to encourage affordable housing development and home ownership strategically throughout the 6th District. And we turn for this minute and a half question. First to Mr. Parrott.
Well, one thing that you don't want to do to have affordable housing is have inflation that's out of control. And yet right now we have inflation that's out of control because of wasteful spending from the Biden-Pelosi-Trone agenda. We have housing prices that are skyrocketing. You know, actually, I've talked to a lot of realtors, and it's a real shame. They're trying to sell homes, but hardly anybody can afford those homes now because the interest rates, instead of being where they were, 3 or 4%, now we're looking at about 7, 8%. You know, that makes it very, very difficult for someone to go out and to buy a home. We have to bring the inflation rate back down. We have to stop the reckless spending in D.C. You can't afford trillions here, trillions there, borrowing it from China, just printing it out, devaluing the dollar. That's what they see this administration continuing to do. You know, the latest thing was we're going to spend $500 billion to forgive student debt. Now, Nancy Pelosi a year ago said that needed to go through the legislature, and I believe it did. But the legislature, now controlled by Democrats, had no say in it at all. They didn't even talk about, hey, this should come to us. Biden really didn't have the authority to do that. There should be a bill. They're fine with it. I'm not fine with it. I'm not fine with $500 billion. I'm very thankful it's going to the courts, and I'm very thankful it's going to be stopped. But we can't afford to continue to spend this kind of money that we don't have on projects that we don't need. We have to help everyday middle-class Americans, and we have to bring that interest rates down so people can actually go out and buy homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone.
Interest rate, the way this works is interest rates have to go up. They're going to go up another 75 bips probably on November 2nd. That might be the last raise the Fed makes. There's getting pushback from the various Fed governor presidents around the country. But they have to go up. But that's how you help stop inflation with monetary policy. What he said is the wrong way to stop inflation. They've got to go up. What that's doing is that's causing housing prices actually to drop. Housing prices have dropped because people can't afford it. You're absolutely right. They cannot afford the interest, so that means there's less demand. When there's less demand, that means prices drop. So we're seeing a drop in housing prices. Finish 270 quickly. I've been supporting 270 from day one, from the American Legion Bridge. What Governor Hogan's working on is excellent. It's totally in the right move. From there, the whole way to Frederick, and all we did was get another $150 million to finish Route 15 so we can connect with what Governor Hogan has brought up. So that solves that one. As far as the affordable housing, we have a big shortage, absolutely. We're 2 years behind on housing, and supply chain certainly exacerbated, the entire issue. We couldn't get the steel, we couldn't get wood, et cetera, from Canada, so we've got a problem in that area big time. We need incentives that come down from the federal government for first-time homeowners. They're the folks that can't get a spot and can't, step in to a single-family home or a condominium.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Our next question, again for a minute and 30 seconds, asks, how do you intend to connect the workforce in the western end of the district to the job opportunities in the eastern part of the district? Mr. Trone.
Broadband, 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 broadband. That's what we need here. That's what we got. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, which was bipartisan, $1.3 trillion, passed by President Biden and the Congress that we have there now. No bipartisan infrastructure bill has been passed for the last 35 years. This Congress passed the bill, and that is going to fund broadband for our country. It's $65 billion for broadband. That's going to give us 5G, and it's going to cap the pricing at $30 a month. And they'll figure that out with subsidies and bringing competition. We can't only have one broadband provider in each town. We all know that. I've been a member of the Chamber of Commerce for 30 years. I understand how business works. We got to have competition. When we have competition, prices go down. So broadband is going to get us telework that connects Western Maryland with the whole country. It's going to get us telehealth. That's how we drive healthcare costs down, is telehealth. You can't go to the doctor every single time and see him or her in person. Many times you need to, but you can't always. And telemental health. Telemental health has worked during COVID and worked well. And the last one's teleeducation. And Western Maryland got hammered on teleeducation 40% of our homes are not connected in these 3 counties. And our school superintendents, who I spoke with every 30 days, reiterated that issue. This will fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
It's interesting. The question is, how do we connect the East and the West with jobs? And I'd suggest that we need to have more jobs in the West. I'd suggest that we need to have more manufacturing jobs in the west part of the district. Having the Luke paper mill shut down was very disappointing, and yet part of the reason we don't have manufacturing is because of new Green Deal policies that my opponent supports. It's trying to make, like the Paris Climate Accord bill, where they're saying, okay, we're going to make us the most clean country in the world, one of the most clean. Well, when that happens, you're making these rules and regulations so tough that they just can't manufacture here, so they don't. So where do they go? Well, they go to China, they go to India, where they have no regulations. So in fact, with those bills, we actually made the world a much, much dirtier place because we're sending the manufacturing to the dirtiest manufacturing that we could ever have in China and India. We need to have reasonable rules, and we need to bring manufacturing back into our area, back into Western Maryland. You know, we had Fairchild here. We had some great industries right here. And unfortunately, a lot of those are gone. But we need to bring them back. And thankfully, I have seen some that are back. But we have to make sure that that's a big effort to make sure we have jobs here locally. People don't want to be going down to D.C. to work. They want to be able to work right here. And that's what we need to be able to do, is get an infrastructure in place that helps them do that. As far as broadband goes, I'm very excited for private market solutions. The government's been telling us for 20 years they're going to get broadband here, but Starlink is going to have the job done worldwide next year.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. So our final question in this section is to ask you, what is the cause of the current inflation rate, and how do you suggest we address it and lower it? And I know that you have both touched on this tangentially in your responses so far. What I would like you to focus on in this next minute and a half would be to explain the economic theory that causes inflation to go up. And we'll turn first to Mr. Parrott.
Well, thank you for that question. I have my MBA from Mount St. Mary's. I'm a local guy. Went to Maryland to College Park, got my civil engineering degree. Went to Mount St. Mary's, got my MBA. It's interesting. We study the cause of inflation, the different things. But one thing that's caused inflation, probably the biggest factor, is that this administration continues to spend money that we don't have. We're borrowing it from China. We're just printing it. When you devalue the dollar, when it's not worth as much, you have a lot more dollars on the market, and the bread is still the same amount of bread, those bread pieces are going to cost more. And that's what we're seeing. Also, when you shut down drilling for natural gas and for oil on our federal lands, like this administration has done, the price of gas is going to go up. And we're going to have to rely worldwide. Instead of, 2 years ago, we had energy independence. We were producing more energy than we were consuming and actually exporting it. Now we're consuming a lot more energy from other nations, and we're relying on Saudi Arabia. We're relying on Venezuela. We should not be relying on these countries for vital supplies. We need to have a strong military. We need to have a strong economy. And an election ploy of taking the petroleum reserves down to its lowest levels in 40 years just to try and artificially keep the price of gas down so people can win these primaries is an insult to the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, drilling, I would support opening up the drilling wells that we closed down in 2009 and the Great Recession. There's a lot of wells there that are perfectly clean, but the investors' company have not opened them up. Instead, they put their money in the technology stocks because of the unevenness in the pricing on oil. So that one does have great potential. Second thing is we put in the CHIPS and Science bill, which is $280 billion to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Companies made a mistake moving their manufacturing to China, to Indonesia, Russia, unreliable partners. And they went for the dollar, and they went to save money, and that was a mistake. I live in the world of CEOs. I got my MBA at the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia. I understand a little bit about business, running a $5-6 billion business. And when you live in that world, those folks realize they goofed and they want to bring that back to the U.S. We need manufacturing back in the U.S., and if it costs $10 more for that widget, we should support American manufacturing, pay the $10 more, recycle the money in our economy, and we win and we grow together. That's where we need to move to. And made in the U.S. is where it needs to be. What else do we have there? Those are the main things. We know inflation is driven by spending. It's a pandemic spending was trillions, and the same with the war.
Thought the red card was going to come soon. Our next question is to ask, what is the role of the federal government as it relates to the price of commodities and utilities, like gasoline, broadband and internet access, and natural gas? So we're trying to hone in on this particular issue and ask you all to comment on what the proper role of the federal government might be. And if you can do that without referring to the opposing party, I would appreciate it. First, Mr. Trone.
You're on your fifth one on this one. Repeat this one again. What's the nuance?
The role of the federal government as it relates to the price of commodities, utilities, gasoline, broadband, internet access, and natural gas, and asking you to focus on what the proper role of the federal government is in those areas.
Well, the proper role, one thing we should have is preventing price gouging. When Chevron goes from $3 billion again to $12 billion, and the American people are paying $5, $6, $7 at the pump, that's price gouging. Aramco, the Saudi Arabians, their profits went up 400%. Is that right? We need to get ourselves off Saudi oil. Saudi oil, we're at one point buying 2 million barrels a day. Now we are down to 500,000 gallons a day, 500,000 barrels a day. So we've cut that by 75%. That's a good thing. Saudi Arabia is not a consistent, reliable partner, and that's been pretty clear based on their knowledge, based on their actions and their support of Putin and the war. But overall, when you lost 8% of your world production, when Russia got interfered with the war, and they produced 8% of the world oil, that caused a huge hit and a spike. And so government's got to be involved to stop excessive profits, and only government can do something like broadband. No one can do that. Government brought electricity to homes in America, then we brought roads, and now we're going to bring broadband. It's an electronic digital highway, and that's what government's job is, and do it a lot reliable and affordable and spur competition. Competition's good. Capitalism is a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Parrott?
There is a role of government when it comes to utilities, because you can only have one person that's going to supply your electricity, for instance. And we have in Maryland the Public Service Commission, which helps to regulate those costs, whether it's going to go up or down, and they have to justify price increases. I think that works really well. So it's a local monopoly. You have to have government involved in utilities. When it comes to energy costs, you know, the real reason that the costs are accelerating the way they are, and the reason we're relying on the Saudi oil, is because the very first day of office, President Biden came in and shut down a lot of the leases that they had on federal lands. Look, these companies, they can't just willy-nilly throw $1 billion here into some fields and say, and not have any guarantee that they're going to be able to continue to use it. They need to have long-term leases. They had that, and they thought it was predictable, and then the rug was just pulled out from under them. You can't have that. And when you do that, they're not going to invest in this country because they don't think they can rely on us, and those energy costs are going to go up, and that's what's happened. Saudi oil, I think it's very disappointing. We heard from Biden that he went over there and said, hey, keep producing the oil that you're producing until after the primaries. Then you can stop. And they said, no, we're not doing that. That was very disappointing. Look, just look it up. Very disappointing that that's what happened. And it's also disappointing that he's draining our petroleum reserves just to artificially keep the price of gas down. Wait for this winter. Wait till after the primaries. But we need a serious change. And that's one reason I'm running for U.S. Congress. We're going to bring those costs down. We're going to become energy independent again. We're going to make sure that we don't have inflation that's through the roof going into a recession. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. The next question asks, we are interested in your views on climate change. What are your long-term solutions to address energy independence combined with a transition to a greener economy including the use of fossil fuels and alternative sources of energy. And for this question, we give you a minute and a half, and we'll start with Mr. Parrott.
Well, one thing we don't want to do is sign the Paris Climate Accord agreement again, which this administration did, which sends the Luke paper mill, people don't have jobs now in Allegheny County. It's very disappointing. What it does is send manufacturing out of this country to the world's dirtiest places where they're producing things, China and India. You know, that's not a solution for a cleaner world. It's a solution for feeling better about yourself. You know, it's also interesting, a lot of these people that have gone out and bought Teslas, and I'm all about the free market. I think we need to have a free market. People need to be able to have choices. But then you have states like California that say they want to get rid of gasoline cars in its entirety. Like, that's unacceptable. And it's actually dirtier than if you had the gasoline-powered cars. These lithium batteries destroy the earth. Maybe that's not in the United States, but it's in other parts of the world. Again, we're making the world a dirtier place by trying to have people transition to all electric cars. It just doesn't make sense. And there are other solutions out there. The private market's full of them. In Annapolis, I've watched and talked with people from GM, from Ford, from Toyota. They've come in and they've shown us some really neat technological things that they have, like hydrogen cars, different types of cars that they have. And yet, it seems that the government has put the pedal to the metal and is favoring one technology, battery cars, over other ones, where the other ones actually might be better. We need the private market to work and to do its job well, and we need to make sure that we have energy independence, again, in this country. That's going to help middle-class America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone, your views on climate change.
Strategic oil reserve, first of all, whole idea of an oil reserve is reserve. When the prices are high and you have a shortage, use the reserve. Refill it when prices are low. So that made all the sense in the world to me. I recommend he move faster on it, not slower. Second thing on Luke, I talked to the CEO that owned Luke in the Midwest probably 5-6 times. I visited Luke, spent a ton of time on Luke. Luke was simply a matter of the men got shafted, the men got screwed over because they consolidated 2 plants, took our technology on the high gloss paper that we had in Luke, and they moved that technology to the Midwest to a plant they already had, and they ran that operation at a higher speed, and they saved money. And Luke paid the brunt. And so it was a bad, bad deal, and Luke got the short end of the stick. And that's very, very unfortunate. Nothing to do with climate change at all. Just that CEO made more money. End of the day, climate change, we have to be in Paris. Either you lead or you get out of the way. And we have to lead on climate change. And if you don't think about the climate is not getting warmer, maybe you're not paying any attention. I mean, maybe you ought to pick up a book, get the statistics, and we've got to lead. If we don't lead, there'll be no climate left, no world left for our children. So we got to get out in front of that. And the Inflation Reduction Act is $370 billion toward all kinds of climate solutions. Yes, electric vehicles, they're part of that.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Next, we ask, starting with an observation, the federal deficit has recently grown under both Republican and Democratic administrations. What is the right amount of a federal deficit? And what is your strategy to achieve that target? And we begin with Mr. Trone.
The federal deficit is, we can't just keep spending our way now, forever, forever, forever. That can't work. I balanced the budget my company for 37 years. You have to live within your budget, so we've got to get that under control. Where did it really go absolutely crazy? Sad story is, and you may not want to hear it, but third year of Trump's fiscal year, year 3, when he inherited, the federal deficit was $480 billion. Obama's last year, $480. Trump's third year, $970. How did that happen? Prolific spending. Both parties are responsible, but the Republicans controlled all 3 branches for 2 of those years. But both parties are responsible. So too much spending, that's for damn sure. But the other issue was C-Corp tax cut. You and I have businesses. We're going to be a sub-S or an LLC. We're not a C-Corp. That's the folks like McDonald's, Uber, not Uber, maybe Uber is, But certainly Google, certainly Tesla, certainly all the big companies, GE, Ford, their tax rate went down from 35 to 21, which moved their effective rate to 8%. Should you pay 8%? We don't pay 8%, do we? That cut $200 billion out of our deficit. $200 billion went to those big companies, and all we did was stock dividends and stock buybacks. That was wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
So we're talking about the federal deficit. Before I get there, though, I do want to talk about the petroleum reserve. You know, that's there for emergencies. And, you know, we have our president talking about Armageddon around the corner. We have the threat, the very real threat, that China would go into Taiwan. That would interrupt things worldwide. You know, that's why we have the reserve. It's not to meddle in the primary elections, to try and get favor with people. It's so in a case of a real emergency that we have the energy that we need to have. And unfortunately, by draining it like we have, we are not going to have enough in the case that China would invade Taiwan. You know, it's interesting, too. I heard someone shaking their head when I brought up that Biden asked Saudi Arabia. You know, it's in the New York Times today. Just look it up. How Saudi Arabia's blow with Biden threatens Democrats in 2022. You know, it's right there, New York Times. It's unacceptable that we have a president that's trying to barter just to try and win primary elections. Oh, just wait till after the primary elections, and then you can slow it down. That's not acceptable. Now, look, federal deficit, my last name's Parrott, but I really like H. Ross Pro, and a lot of people, trying to be polite, call me Pro. And I don't mind that, because I really like H. Ross. And you might remember a long time ago, he had these charts, he had these graphs about how we need to balance the budget. And I agree that's one of the big priorities I have. Look, I don't know who is going to be president 2 years from now, but we need to make sure whoever's there that we have a balanced budget, whether it's Republican or Democrat. I'm going to push to have a balanced budget. We need to do it. H. Ross Perot was right. We are bankrupting our country. We're setting ourselves up in just about 10 years for $1 trillion interest on the debt every single year. Unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Our next question, again for a minute and a half, asks, do you believe that the current federal tax code is fair? Why or why not? And what would be your approach to changing and reforming the tax code? And Mr. Parrott would turn first to you.
The federal tax code is extremely confusing. You know, to really do it the right way, you have to hire high-powered tax attorneys, you have to hire tax accountants, and we could simplify this. There are a lot of ways that we could simplify. We need to simplify the tax code to make it fair for everyone, to make sure that the companies, they're paying their fair share. But you know, one thing that doesn't make sense is to hire 87,000 new IRS agents to enforce the federal tax code, which is so confusing. When I was at the Leitersburg Peach Festival recently, I asked a lot of the vendors there, I said, are you going to be here next year? And it had just come out that they were going to hire, they're going to basically double almost the size of the IRS. And they're like, no, I can't afford to be audited. If they're not going to be selling their honey, they're not going to be selling their handcrafts. These are second businesses. They don't have time. It's not like they're cheating. They're not cheating. But they don't have time or money to hire high-powered tax attorneys or the high-powered tax accountants. They just want to go out and make a buck. You know, people who are trying to sell things on eBay, they're going to have a hard time when you have audits that are going to be increased. You know that the number of audits that are going to happen with all these new IRS agents, and it's mostly going to be small business where it happens, is going to hurt small business. It's going to hurt the direction our country's going in. I believe that the backbone of the economy is the small business. We do encourage small businesses. Simplifying the tax code is the way to go, not hiring 87,000 new IRS agents.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
Let's go back to emergency. Definition of emergency, I think, is what we have now in inflation. That's an emergency. And how about our friends over in Russia invading Ukraine? I think that was an emergency. It's the first major conflict we've had since World War II of that nature. This is an emergency. It's the absolute right time to use the petroleum. As far as why Biden came to Hagerstown, they called us on the phone and said, we're coming to Hagerstown, and where should we go? Because we want to do a jobs thing. We told them to go to the Volvo plant. Nobody asked them to come here. I don't need President Biden to win this election, that's for sure. That's going to happen. As far as people hurting, that's for sure. Fixing the debt, though, it's just what we talked about a while ago. It's a C Corps. We gave away $1.9 trillion to the biggest companies in America. That's why we don't take PAC money. That's why we don't take lobbyist money, because we can't have those folks running who you are. Cannot happen. So 1.9 trillion, those taxes have to go back. They can't pay 7, 8, 9%. That's crazy. The taxes have to go up on those making over $400,000 and up. And who are the IRS agents going to look at? They're going to go where the money is. They're going after those big companies. They're not going after the beekeeper. The average IRS, when you give them $1 to the IRS, it returns $4 in tax revenue. That's how you solve the deficit. Gets people to pay their taxes at the top level. The big companies, they aren't paying.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Next question is, how do you intend to regulate the enforcement of the tax code? I think we touched on that a little bit. Given the impact of the additional 87,000 new IRS employees with a focus on increased auditing, and if you could please focus on your party's or your platform in your response and not comment on the other party's response. Mr. Trone first.
We've already covered that. It's a redundant question. I'm just going to pass.
All right, thank you. Mr. Parrott.
It's interesting. My opponent just talked about not receiving PAC money, and if that were only so, just go to opensecrets.com right now. You'll see they took money from unions. You'll see he
Mr.
took
Parrott,
money.
do you want to talk about the 87,000 IRS employees?
Part of the question that he had. So, as far as the PAC money, just opensecrets.com. Go see it. As far as the regulation of the tax code, the 87,000 new IRS employees, it almost seems like there's a quota. My opponent says, oh, it's 4 to 1. We're going to get $4 for every $1 we spend. You know, we don't want a quota for the IRS. They're already taking a lot of money. We need to simplify the tax code. We need to make it easier for people to file their taxes. We need to make sure, you know, a flat tax was a good idea. There are a lot of good ideas on how to reduce the complication of the tax code. And that's one thing that I'll be working for, is to make sure that we have a tax code that's easier to comply with. You know, it's interesting. You could even have a postcard where people just file the taxes on a postcard. That's an easy way to do it. We need to make sure that it's simple. Hiring 87,000 new IRS agents with perhaps a quota, saying they need to justify their jobs, that's going to hurt middle America. It's going to hurt the middle class. It's going to hurt small businesses, and that's where they're going to try and make their money from. It's not the big wealthy businesses. They already have the tax accountants. They they can't get it out of them. They're going to have to go after these people that don't have it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott.
Can I reclaim 15 seconds on a flat tax? Please. Pretty please.
That would sound fair.
What's that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a flat tax is a really, really horrible idea. Flat tax just gives all the big companies, all the wealthy folks, a free ride, and we all end up paying the same thing. They need to pay a hell of a lot bigger number, and it's got to be a graduated tax. A flat tax is uber regressive. We can't have that.
Apparently that was your 15 seconds.
That's fair.
I know that both of you want to be elected. That's pretty clear. You've made that crystal clear. I believe that it would be helpful to the audience that when we leave today, that we have perhaps come closer to making a decision about who we're going to vote for. However, when I go home to talk to my wife, she isn't going to want to know why I decided or who I decided on, but she's going to want to know why. So I would appreciate if both of you would try to focus a little bit more on why we should have a certain opinion on economic policy or whatever the topic of the day might be. And let's try this new approach out on some questions regarding health care. And these will be 1-minute questions. The largest generation in our history, the baby boomers, continues to retire. Many fear that our country's Social Security system is not on a sound footing. What measures need to be taken to ensure that retirement benefits will be strong for future generations? And we'll turn first to Mr. Parrott.
You know, Social Security is something that people have paid into for their whole life. And you know, it's interesting. Most people have put a lot of money into it, and they're never going to get back what they put into Social Security. I don't expect to get anywhere close to what I put into Social Security coming back. But we need to make sure that we have a strong economy. If we don't have a strong economy, if we continue to borrow money that we don't have from China, print new money, that's going to devalue the dollar. And so even if we have Social Security that's fully funded, it's not worth what it was. And even right now, it's not worth what it was 1 year ago. They're getting the same check, but it's not worth what it was. We're devaluing the dollar. This is a really bad direction that our country's going in. We have to reverse the inflation. And the way to do that is to be responsible in D.C. and don't spend money that we don't have on projects that we don't need. We need to make sure that our retirees are able to not have to make a decision between eating and heating this coming winter. And that's why one of the reasons I'm running for Congress, to make sure that we balance this budget and stop the inflation.
Mr. Trone.
Fixing Social Security is, frankly, very straightforward. We have to eliminate the payroll tax cap on Social Security as folks' income goes up. What that does is that means all the folks that make in the high income brackets $1 million, $2 million, $10 million, $100 million, they pay into Social Security the whole way up. Right now there's a cap. That cap means they don't pay their fair share. So the super rich, folks like myself who's wealthy, we didn't pay our fair share on that cap because that's the way it works. You have to eliminate that. The Democrats are absolutely in favor of that, but we cannot get it through the Senate. So that's a simple solution. It's what everybody in D.C. knows is the answer, but there's no political will to make it happen. As far as you talked about health care, I was going to jump on to mental health and addiction. That's where we need to get our focus. The two biggest crises right now that face our country, and that's what we should be laser focused on, how we work on them in a bipartisan way. Addiction, 107,000 dead last year.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. We will get to that. Maybe we have our questions in the wrong order. Who knows? The next question, given the impact inflation has had on fixed retirement benefits, how do you propose to address that issue? And we'll start with you, Mr. Trone. This is a 1-minute question.
Yeah, we can't just have retirement benefits for our seniors locked and loaded. They're going to have a COLA. They're going to have to go up with inflation. So you've got to index them. It's like the minimum wage. The minimum wage in America is $7.25 an hour. We passed that in 2009. Does anybody here pay $7.25? You couldn't hire anybody for $7.25. It's impossible. But we can't get it changed, so it's still there 22, 23 years later. So you've got it. That should have been indexed for inflation. And that would have worked way, way better than what we did. And now we don't go back and take another look at it again.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
Thanks. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Given the impact inflation has had on fixed retirement benefits, how do you propose to address this issue?
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about. People who are on fixed income this winter, deciding between whether they're going to eat or whether they're going to heat their homes. The problem that's got us here are the really bad decisions from the administration and Congress where they're spending money that we don't have, borrowing it from China, printing it. It's making the inflation rate go up at an unacceptable rate, over 8.5%. We do need to have a COLA or some reasonable way so that people on fixed income who are relying on Social Security can continue to live their lives, continue to pay the bills. But it's going to be interesting because we have to make sure that we have a government that's not wasting money, that's actually responsible, that actually has not a huge amount of debt like we do. In about 10 years, the $1 trillion just payments on the debt, it's killing us. Again, we need to have a balanced budget, and that's one of the big things I'm going to be working for when you send me to D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Next, we would ask, how do you propose to curb the continuing rise in the cost of prescription drugs? And Mr. Parrott, we'll turn to you first for your 1-minute answer.
You know, in Annapolis, there was a bill that came forward to say, okay, you're going to have a certain amount of cap on prescription drugs. The problem is that doesn't work. The problem is if you have a cap, then what you end up having are shortages on that drug. The private market does work. We need to make sure the private market, when they invest in new medicines, will know that they can recoup that investment. They're literally spending billions and billions of dollars every single year trying to come up with new drugs, new ways to help people. And the United States is the leader in the entire world of coming up with new drugs and new ways to help people. We have to make sure that there's a balance. Yes, we want to bring down the cost of prescription drugs where we can. And I think one thing is, you see Canada selling the same drug for a much lower cost than the United States. We need to enforce that. That could not be allowed to continue. We have to make sure there's equal payment around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
Touch back on the private Social Security real quick. The Republican answer on Social Security by McCarthy, their leader in the House, Rick Scott in the Republican Senate, is privatize it. So if you want Social Security to go away, you can privatize it, and they want to look at that every 5 years. Every 5 years, that's what they want to pass, privatizing Social Security. I think your guarantee is going to be gone. Next thing, as far as drugs, we talked about that. The Inflation Reduction Act, 50 drugs, negotiated with the drug companies, cap on insulin at 35, and $2,000 cap for seniors. That starts in 2025. But you know what the problem is? That shouldn't have even happened in the first place. Do you think I buy any wine or beer or spirits and not pay less than someone else that buys 100 times less than me? The drug companies took away the ability to negotiate when Obamacare was passed at 3 a.m. in the morning. They make too much money. They make more money than the software companies make. And you know what software companies make? That's not too hard to replicate.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. With the cost of health insurance virtually unaffordable for many, is Medicare for all a viable option, or what do you propose to rein in the cost of health insurance? And we turn first to you, Mr. Trone, for your 1-minute response.
Yeah, I don't support Medicare for all. If we started with a clean slate and no one had any insurance whatsoever, that point in time, Medicare for all might have made a lot of sense. But when we have 169 million folks that have a policy, and a lot of those policies, like I was at the Volvo plant the other day, those union members at the Volvo plant, they fought hard to get better health care, and they gave up $1 an hour wages. They traded hourly rate for better health care. Under Medicare for all, they lose that, and we all have the same plan. So everybody went a different route. Some went for pay, some went for health care. And so just putting it on top when we've already got 169 million plans out there is probably not the right time to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
Since we're talking about health insurance, my opponent talked about how it passed Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act passed in the middle of the night, which it did, and it had a lot of bad things in it. I fought that for over a year with many of you here, taking trips down to D.C., trying to make sure that wouldn't pass. Unfortunately, it's the first step in the government takeover of the healthcare industry. And I believe that's definitely the wrong direction to go in as a country. We need to get it back to private market solutions to bring the cost down. We need to be able to have competition across state lines. Healthcare should really be about, health insurance should be about insurance, not about every single visit you pay $25, but it really costs about $200. I liked the idea of HSAs. I had my own business, have my own business. But you have a health savings account where people put it in, it's their own money, and then when they go to the doctor, they could pay a lot of it out of that HSA account up until a high deductible, maybe $2,000, $5,000. It actually becomes health insurance, which helps to bring those rates way, way down, make them affordable. And also when people are actually paying, you're going to see the cost of health care itself go down.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. The next portion of our forum will be devoted to your thoughts on a number of what we're calling wedge issues, which I don't think we've fully touched on yet. Each of you will be given 90 seconds to express your views, and what we're interested in first, we'll turn to you, Mr. Parrott, for your minute and 30-second response. What is the right immigration policy? Not what is wrong, but what is the right policy, please?
Well, oftentimes to start with what's right, you have to look at what's wrong. And we have the highest migrant encounters in September that our country and probably the world has ever seen, 227,547 in 1 month, over the population of Washington County, about 1.5 times our population. That's completely unacceptable. This is a human tragedy story. Across the border, we have opioids and fentanyl just coming straight in here. You've got human trafficking. Gangs are coming in. You've got terrorists that we even caught a month ago that are coming in, known terrorists coming into our country or right across the border. We have to secure the border. One way to do that is with a wall. You can't maybe build the wall on the entire thing, but you can have electronic surveillance in other parts. It's funny you shake your head. It seems like you're okay with 227,000 migrant encounters, more than the whole population of Washington County coming to our country in 1 month. Fentanyl that's coming in looking like sweet tarts, killing our kids. To me, this is completely unacceptable. It needs to be stopped. One way to do it is to secure the border. Other countries do it. We can do it. Canada does it. You can't just go straight into Canada. It's not going to happen. We can secure our border between the United States and Mexico. We have to secure the border. And then we have to look at our own immigration system as well and try and make it a much more streamlined, a less bureaucratic process for people who want to come into this country legally, especially those that are really going to help our country. We need to help make that a better process than it is right now. It's very, very difficult, takes way too long, and we've got to change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
We all support a secure border. A wall is certainly not the answer. Every time we built the wall, they go over the wall, they cut a hole, they go through the wall. They're going to go there. It's going to happen. A wall is just a bad idea. It doesn't work. Technology, good idea. Do we have a perfect solution? Absolutely not. But we got to have a secure border. The fentanyl does not come through people walking over the border. If you go to intelligence briefing, you're going to find out that 96% of the fentanyl comes in passenger vehicles. There's 73 million a year cross that border, 200,000 a day, 200,000 a day, impossible to stop, and they're not driven by Mexican nationals. They're driven by U.S. citizens because U.S. citizens don't get stopped. The cartels are ruthless. They are absolutely outrageously bad people, but they know how to run a business. So that's how the fentanyl comes over. We only need 2 truckloads, 2 of my pickup trucks, 3 to 5 tons is all that we need to kill the 80,000 Americans that died of fentanyl last year. 3 to 5 tons in a back of a pickup truck. So it's small, so powerful, 50 times more powerful than heroin. A pack of Sweet and Low kills 500 people. So we're not going to stop it by the people walking because they aren't carrying the fentanyl. It's in the vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Next wedge issue is reproductive rights. And Mr. Trone, we'll turn to you first.
As far as immigration policy, we didn't get to that because we got stuck on fentanyl, but we need to figure out a thoughtful immigration policy. Right now, it's completely, 30 years, we haven't changed it. We got to figure out a way that we can beat China and beat India and beat everybody in the world market of ideas and smarts. That means the folks want to come here and study, get an education. They want to come here and invest and build businesses. That's a good thing. Immigration fuels the economy. 40 of our top 100 companies in this country, Apple, Google, eBay, were driven by immigrants or the son of an immigrant. They created jobs. So we want the smartest people here that are going to create the jobs here, the jobs of the future.
And the question was about reproductive rights.
Oh, I support a woman's right to choose. Government, me, judges, politicians, we have no right to tell a woman what her choices should be. It's her job. It's her life. She and her doctor, they can figure that out. We cannot get involved in that. And Roe v. Wade was an abomination. It shouldn't have happened. It turned us back 50 years. And my opponent feels quite differently. He'll tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott?
It's interesting when you consider this issue. You said reproductive rights. Everybody's got the right to reproduce. It's great. Contraceptives are out there. It's all good. Now, if you're talking specifically about abortion, which is what my opponent went to, I have to say that my record has been misconstrued. It's been put out there on flyers, on commercials, and I think it's very disappointing that we have a U.S. congressman that's actually lying about their opponent. That's why we had to set up a website called thetruthabouttroneandparrott.com. His claim is that I wouldn't allow abortion in the case of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. That's simply not true. It's not true. I've never said it. I have put forward bills in Annapolis, and as I talk to people going door knocking, going door to door, I talk to many people who are pro-choice. And when we talk about the issue and they hear, well, in Maryland, you could have an abortion up to 9 or 10 months, they're appalled. which is true. Yeah, you can have a late pregnancy. They're appalled. And yet that happens in Maryland. You can have an abortion right up until birth. The extreme position is my opponent's position, which wants to legalize that not just in Maryland, but all across the country. He voted for this bill. It didn't just try to bring Roe v. Wade back. It actually got rid of a lot of state law that is already there in spite of Roe v. Wade, including that if the baby is born, that it would be against the law for a doctor to resuscitate that baby. Now, born when they were trying to have an abortion, they wouldn't be allowed to resuscitate it. That's inhumane. That's wrong. That's an extreme position.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. The next wedge issue we would like your thoughts on is marriage equality. And we'll turn first to you, Mr. Parrott.
Great. To finish that last question, what is my position? I have put forward bills in Annapolis. It says that parents should be notified if their kids are about to have an abortion, parental notification. It just makes sense. There is a bill in D.C. right now that says 15 weeks. You could have abortions up until 15 weeks, but then after that, it would be only in the cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother. I could support that. Now, we talked about marriage equality, and I'll tell you what, in Maryland, I helped get this on the ballot. It passed in Maryland that we would have same-sex marriage. A lot of people were upset about it. People signed signatures. We brought it to the people to vote on. The people of Maryland voted on that bill, and I support what the people of Maryland, I would have voted the other way, but the people of Maryland said same-sex marriage is legal, and in Maryland it's going to stay legal. Again, I don't think it's right, though, for the U.S. Supreme Court to come in and just legislate from the bench. That's what they did in Roe v. Wade. That's one reason I was very happy they overturned it. That was a very bad decision. Obergefell is another decision where they just legislated from the bench. They have no business legislating from the bench. That should be up to the states. Each state had, in their own state constitutions, a lot of them had different bills the way they were looking at it. In Maryland, same-sex marriage is legal. That didn't rely on Obergefell. That would stay the same if that was overturned. I'm not running to be a judge. I'm running to be a congressman. I'm running to make laws, and I think the laws need to be made from the Congress or from the state legislatures, not from the bench from the United States Supreme Court. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
We had this discussion 2 nights ago at the last forum, and we had the same dissembling then. These are actually the bills in 2013, 2014, 2015, Neil's bills that did not allow abortion in case of incest, case of rape, life of the mother. So we move on.
Read the bill.
As far
it
as
has life of the mothers in every single one of them.
Read the bills. So voted against removing marriage as an offense of rape. That was a good one. So in February of 22, he voted against, if you're married and your wife says no, he voted you're allowed to go ahead and rape your wife. His comment, which we actually have a quote, I mean, you just pat them in the wrong way. I guess I emphasize the word wrong because you know it's wrong. And they take it sexually inappropriately. That's marriage. Those things are protected in marriage. I don't think that's the way I look at life. LGBTQ, we've got a horrible problem with our folks being discriminated against. 50% of our folks that are LGBTQ youth have considered suicide in the last year. That's unbelievable. We have phenomenal discrimination, and we've got to stand by folks' right to choose, and we can't dictate that, and we have to protect our folks and support the Human Rights Campaign. We offered benefits for partners of my company in 2002, 20 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. The next issue we would like both of you to address is your position on gun safety. And we'll turn first to you, Mr. Trone.
It's appalling what we've done on gun safety. Nobody wants to take away the right to hunt, to shoot skeet, to target practice, to own a gun in your home that's properly licensed, that's properly background checked. I've hunted all my entire life. I have shotguns, 12 and 20s in my home. I'm looking forward to hunting again for pheasant, for geese, for quail. I like to hunt. But at the same time, Uvalde, I mean, we've had 20 since Columbine. We've had 30 since Columbine. Frankly, we're better than this. How can our children go to school and have to talk about, are we going to come home? Is there going to be a shooter here? You know, we have a lot of technology we can do. We can figure out how to have trigger locks. We can tie them to your fingerprints. We can have background checks that, for some reason, 80% of Americans agree, but we can't get it done. All the stuff we need that 80% of us agree on. Common sense things to save children's lives and save suicide lives. 36,000 suicides last year by gun. They just picked up a gun and they were dead. If they would have had a chance to talk to someone and get some help, they'd be alive. But the gun was there, so they're dead. We can do better than that.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Parrott.
Well, just going back, he just mentioned the Human Rights Campaign supports the campaign, and sure they do. They actually gave him some PAC money. He says he doesn't take PAC money, but he got some from them. Just go to opensecrets.com. He talked about rape, and he said that I allow that in marriage.
This
you know
is
what?
gun
I
safety.
need to go back to this question. He talked about rape, and I never voted to say rape would be okay in marriage. Never, ever. That is against the law. It's always been against the law. It's still against the law. What I was talking about was the specific bill that passed where it talked about sexual harassment, and what they were going to use it for is for divorce cases, and it could go either way, that you approached me sexually in a way that I didn't want, that was unwelcome, and they're going to use that in divorce cases, especially when they're looking for child custody. I talked for a couple different lawyers before I voted on that bill. I took it very seriously. I don't make emotional decisions. I'm an engineer. I try and look at how it's actually going to affect people, and a lot of times we pass bills that have unintentional consequences, and unfortunately that bill has that. Look, rape, completely illegal, should always be illegal, whether married or not married. Gun safety, I support Second Amendment rights. I think you need to be able to have the right to defend yourself. I've actually offered bills in Annapolis. One of them is the Castle Doctrine that says if someone comes on your property and they are threatening you, that you should be able to use a firearm to defend yourself, to defend your family. I think that's important. I think we need to make sure that firearms are legal. We have this as our Second Amendment right. I think it needs to be defended. And of course, we need to make sure that only the right people could get those firearms.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Well, we have moved to our final question, and we give each of you 2 minutes to cover for us what makes you the best candidate for the position of representative to Congress from Maryland's 6th District. And you have 2 minutes for your wrap-up, and we'll start with Mr. Trone.
I thought we decided Neil was first on this one again.
Yeah, I'll go first.
That'll be fine.
Yeah. Just because, yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you all. Thanks for being here. It's an important discussion. You know, unfortunately, my opponent's been trying to deceive people. We had to set up our own website, thetruthabouttroneandparrott.com. You can go there. But I offer a solid, positive vision for America moving forward. I support the Republican commitment to America. I believe we need to have an America where our economy is strong, where we actually balance the budget, where inflation isn't out of control, and we're facing a huge recession. We need to take responsible decisions in D.C. I'll be making those responsible decisions. I believe we need to live in America where you don't have to be afraid. You know, carjackings went up 175% in Montgomery County just last year. Think about it. You get in your car, somebody's there with a gun at your head, and you have to leave. We have to bring crime back down. One way to do that is support the police. My opponent voted to defund the police. We have to have a secure border. We have to make sure, you know, these numbers are just astronomical. 1.5 times the population of Washington County coming into our country in 1 month. We need the wall. We need electronic surveillance. We need to enforce that border. My opponent doesn't support those things. We need education where parents have a say in their children's education and where things that they don't agree with are not taught. It should be real simple. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Teach the kids the basics. They should also have financial literacy when they graduate. Gerrymandering. I fought gerrymandering. That's why we have a very competitive race right now. He's defended these gerrymandered districts with an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court. I fought them. I've been fighting them for 10 years. Now we have a fair district. Now's the time, and I'm asking you to please vote for me on November 8th or during early voting, or if you're voting by mail, during voting by mail. This election is a contrast. It's a huge contrast between my opponent and me. And if you vote for me, we're going to get our country going in the right direction again. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Parrott. Mr. Trone?
To loop back quickly and close out, open secrets, we checked that when Neil brought that up the last time. We had 2 checks for $12 and $36 that were sent because they thought it was an in-kind donation because we put out a press release. So they sent us $12. Another guy sent us $36. We sent their $12 and $36 back, but that doesn't show in open secrets, but that's how it works. As far as constituent services, I certainly want to tout that for a second. We have an office in Hagerstown. I think we've got the best constituent services anywhere in Congress because I understand retail, and in retail, I work for you. And if I don't get it right for you, I won't be back. And so I've got to take care of any issues that you have, unemployment, visas, you name it, we take care of it. So that's the kind of behind us. Looking forward, thanks for having us here. Neil, thank you. Thank you very much for running a spirited campaign. We appreciate it. Thanks for the Chamber for being here. We've been endorsed by the Chamber nationally. We've been endorsed by the farmers nationally. So we got some good endorsements in those areas. And, frankly, what we're going to work on is things that we care about. We care about compassion, those that are suffering from mental health, those that are suffering in addiction. That's who we're focused on. We care about civility. That's why I'm number 12 on working bipartisan. That's why I'm always on the Republican side of the aisle, meeting Republicans, putting together them on my legislation so my stuff gets done. I get stuff over the finish line. That's why I'm there. I'm not there to waste my time. I didn't go there for a job because I need a job. I'm there on a mission. And it's a mission on addiction, it's a mission on mental health, and it's a mission on more money for medical research. That's about your children and my children. And I lead the NIH monies with Roy Blunt, a Republican senator. He and I work side by side to drive NIH spending, and I think that's how we should think. We should think long-term like business thinks, long-term, not short-term.
Thank you, Mr. Trone and Mr. Parrott, and we appreciate your taking the time to be with us this morning and to move us forward in our decision-making process. Let's give them a round of applause.
Well, thank you again. As you see and as you hear, running for Congress is not for the faint of heart. The candidates have got to be well-versed on the issues. And you heard there are many issues to address. So again, we want to thank your candidates for your interest in public service. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us. Let's give Richard Wilson a round of applause for his moderation. Thank you. And to thank each of you for coming out. The meter started at 9, and so have a good rest of the day. Thanks.